My name is Renee Muratti, and I'm the Chief Assistant in the State Attorney's Office in Tampa, Florida. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our approaches to emergency planning using hurricanes as our context, because that's our big planning that we normally do. I know everyone on here does not have hurricanes, fortunately, but I do think there are some key principles that are the same no matter what type of emergency you're trying to prepare for. So with hurricanes, when we're using that as a planning model, some things that are very specific to hurricanes is we often have lead up time to try to prepare for what's going to happen, but we're not sure what our final impact is going to be or the scope. That part is unpredictable. So it does have some differences with certain other emergencies. Some of the stuff and some of the approaches we take, we also developed during some planned disruptions. So for example, in 2012, Tampa hosted the Republican National Convention, and I'm sure those of you on here from larger cities are like, okay, we have conferences all the time. For us and our proximity to where it was held, it actually meant a courthouse closure for a full week. And so we had to make some planning to deal with that situation. And then I think everyone on this call has learned lessons from planning for a sudden prolonged disruption and dealing with COVID. And we've learned stuff from that we've applied to our approach to planning for hurricanes. The big tension in all emergency planning is finding a balance of safety versus access to courts. So you want to avoid unnecessary closures while also allowing time for adequate preparation and protection. So first up, obviously, whether you do a formal planning process or not, I think this is what we all naturally do, is know our operational environment. So you need to know your geography and infrastructure and be able to identify what your primary facilities, your backup locations, and your emergency-related facilities are. So I'll show you a map in a second and talk about our geography in a second. But our primary facility is we have a single courthouse that is our main courthouse located in downtown Tampa. We have a small courthouse on the edge of our county in Plant City that just does civil and some low-level misdemeanor cases. And then our county also has an emergency operations center that we're not normally part of that, but that'll come up in a few minutes. So where this blue star is, that is where Tampa is at. We're on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and we're right at the mouth of a bay, which when it comes to hurricanes, the big worry we always have is if a hurricane comes straight up, all of our county will be underwater. Unlike other areas, we have been very fortunate and hopefully will continue to be so in the impacts we have had. This is our circuit. I think we're also fortunate in our planning that we are a single county. So the blue star on the word Tampa is where our courthouse is, right there next to the water. If I were to look out my window and tear down a parking garage, I would have a lovely view of the bay. And then Plant City is our secondary courthouse. It is a relatively new facility and has a lot of unused space. So we've always thought of that as our backup location. And then I put this red star here, kind of in the middle is where our Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office is located. It is our jail facilities. They run our first appearance court remotely to our main courthouse. Our emergency operations center is also located in that general area. So it's kind of in the middle of the county. All right, so 2024 was a good example of some planning we had to do. We had two hurricanes back to back. We had a Hurricane Helene formed around Sunday, September 22nd, and became a hurricane by September 25th. And so we had some lead up time of what was going to happen. And this is one of the predictions that occurred during that time. And as you can see, there's a very large cone of where this could make landfall. And although we are not where they were initially predicting landfall to be, we're still within that cone of feeling impacts. And hurricanes are so huge, even if you're fortunate not to be the main person hit, you are still likely to have some impact. I was actually fortunate that I was at the PCE conference in September, and all flights were canceled. So I got to spend a lovely week visiting Salt Lake City and taking advantage of beautiful weather while everyone I knew was back here struggling with preparing for a hurricane. So Hurricane Helene then made landfall on Thursday. This is one of the satellite images. It shows you how large it is. We are way down here, but you can see the impact is massive. And once again, we were fortunate that it went further north than us. Although being on the backside of the hurricane, we had a lot of damage, but not a direct hit. We then, in October, because we had decided to do back-to-back hurricanes that year, we had Hurricane Milton. And Hurricane Milton, once again, you can see a prediction on Sunday. You're looking at landfall into Wednesday. And Milton actually then made landfall Wednesday, this is how big Milton was, and it hit just south of Tampa. So we were fortunate not to be in the main line, but we still had a lot of impact. So we had time for preparations, but there was a limit to how much we could actually control. So the way we approach planning for this is the first thing we do is we looked at what our essential functions are. And the things we identified as essential functions were first appearance court. Although arrests are normally down during a hurricane, it is still something that as you're leading up and doing some closures for preparation, you still need to make sure you're occurring them and you need to be ready to get them back up and running. We also have juvenile detention hearings, which are a juvenile version of first appearances. We need victims to be able to have access for emergency injunctions for protection. Although we're not involved in it, we need to be able to have shelter hearings for dependency cases for kids that need to be taken out of homes because they're in danger. And then one thing we have here that our office handles are emergency medical petitions, which are normally where you have a child who is going to be getting emergency surgery and the parents have an objection to them using blood products. We have a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that this comes up with, and we have to have an emergency hearing to have the courts order that blood products can be used if necessary. In 2024, we actually had we don't do a lot of these. We actually had an interesting situation where as the hurricane was coming in, we had to have one at night. A child was going into surgery, and we were busy trying to find a way to get an interpreter because the parents did not speak English in order to do a remote hearing in order to get this surgery conducted as necessary. So the other thing we do when we're looking at this is we look at our interagency coordination. That is key. Part of what is happening, I think they touched on this in Hawaii, is we're not directly the people that are involved or responsible for all of these things. A lot of agencies outside of our courthouse have the ultimate authority. So our county has their emergency operations center. The governor is declaring states of emergency and making directions. In 2024, we actually had the utility company decide they were going to take the entire power grid offline in downtown Tampa. For us, our servers are located in downtown Tampa, so that made additional work our IT department had to do to secure everything. We actually have a regular meeting that we do with all our courthouse stakeholders every other month with our courts, our clerk of court, state attorney, public defender's office, and some other parties. And when an emergency is arising, we convert that to more frequent meetings for emergency coordination. And so we also include our sheriff's office because they are responsible for our jail and our courthouse security, our Department of Juvenile Justice and Department of Children and Family, Department of Corrections, any other partner that we think needs to be part of this. Our chief judge really kind of leads the way in these meetings because he also sits on the meetings for our county emergency operations, and he determines the closures or reduced schedules that we're going to follow. And we now actually have a chart we use, I think it's in the materials, where it's like what level are we at is what level of closures we're going to have. So while we're doing preparation, we still have a lot more functioning going on, and then there's a certain point in time where everyone's sheltering in place or sheltering in shelters and everything is shut down. We used to always do our closures where follow the schools, whatever the schools are doing. But after another hurricane, which missed our area entirely, our schools were shelters for another area and people were living in the schools. So schools were closed for almost 2 weeks and there was no reason functionally for the rest of us not to be up and running. So we've kind of broken apart and do our own decision making now. Big key on all of this is communications. You have to plan out your communications with the community. You don't want people coming up to a closed courthouse when law enforcement wants everyone off the streets and at home. So you want to keep people safe. You use, while we are directly using phone systems to call and cancel witnesses, we're also using news media and social media in order to push the message, courthouse is closed, do not show up. We actually have less of a problem with people showing up unnecessarily than we do in getting them back to court after the emergency has passed. We also have an internal command structure. Our executive leadership team meets daily or more frequently during an emergency, and we try and have clear internal roles with designated backups. So a big key part is our IT department. So they are responsible for making sure our servers are backed up, and we do back up to our emergency operations center. They are responsible for dealing if we have power grid failures and making sure that we have remote access capabilities. Prior to COVID, most of our attorneys didn't even have laptops. So now the fact that everyone has access to a laptop, well, it seems like a little thing for a government agency, it actually has been critical when we're doing the planning for all of this.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And communication. So we use a program called Ready Ops. There are a lot of them out in the market. When a new employee starts, they're asked to sign up for Ready Ops. Every year before hurricane season, we have everyone update their information, and you put in all the emails or phone numbers you want to be communicated on. So we have one system where we're sending out communications and saying, here's what's going on to everyone in our office. We also understand it's important to communicate, even when you feel like you have nothing to say. When you're preparing for a hurricane, there's a lot of sitting and waiting, but people want to hear nothing has changed. And so we spend a lot of time sending that message out. We also use an old school phone tree on the back end, which I'll talk about in a moment. Then because prosecutor office is all about people, we then deal with our staffing, coverage, and just the human reality of the situation. So we identify the essential staff for those essential functions. We pick backup people for all of those and make sure everyone has the technology and access they need. One year when we had a closure, I actually had a first appearance court. I had a laptop with most of our records downloaded on this massive 30-pound laptop because they didn't think we were going to have the connectivity that we ended up having. We also have to be flexible in our assignments, so our on-call assistants are shifted. We make sure everything is covered, and then people in leadership roles are asked to step into covering roles when needed. So our elected state attorney actually normally in the past has opted to cover first appearance court herself and will stay out at the sheriff's office near the jail, so she doesn't have to worry about driving, and we'll handle that so we have no transportation or coverage issue. And then you have to acknowledge uneven impact. In the HR world, we're always trying to treat all of our employees equally, but in a situation like this, I think we do have to be responsive to the idea that people are going to have different issues. You're going to have people with childcare issues, schools shutting down, and you might have to step up and cover for them. You're going to have power and transportation barriers. When a storm hits, I could have one neighborhood that people are fine, and another neighborhood over, their streets are flooded and can't get to work. And you're going to have people that lose property or are displaced. In 2024, we had one employee who lost their home in the first hurricane and then lost his rental property in the second hurricane. So while we had several people who lost their residence, no one had it quite to that impact, and having to reach out to people and find out what do you need, what can we do to help, I think is critical. And keeping in mind that they're not going to be able to work at 100% because they are dealing with those situations. Which brings me to recovery and reentry. So after the storm has passed, we have our supervisors do their old school phone tree, and they have contact with every single employee. Make sure they're okay. Can you get to work? Do you need something? And then we report that up to see what we can do to assist people. We had one person who, after a few days, still couldn't get their insurance company to call back. A former police officer in our area was now working for that insurance company. We're able to get them in touch with a claims agent so they could do something. Little things like that help out, assess the availability and what people need. I have people asking, we had another person lost their apartment. We were donating furniture to her for her new place she was going to have to stay at because she had no insurance. She had just finished law school. We also look at our court reentry. We have to reschedule a lot of hearings. We use social media to let people know court's back open, but we're also have to be flexible about people not showing up. There's generally administrative orders issued that toll speedy trial for the period that courts are closed. And then we just start notifying victims and witnesses and getting new subpoenas out. Our biggest struggle is usually getting our judges to respond back about who's going to hold which court and when, but we are persistent and get our answers so we can get people there as much as possible.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. And then we also our case assessment, there's certain emergency related offenses. We educate our office, we educate law enforcement, and we usually have a little bit of an uptick in domestic violence after people have been ordered to shelter in place. So we prepare for that. And then we do an after action review, what worked, what failed, what we need to update accordingly. And then I have 2 examples. This is Tropicana Field, which is not in my county, but it is next door to us. And it is where the Tampa Bay Rays used to play baseball. It was where first responders were being housed during one of the hurricanes. And one of the first things that happened in that hurricane was that the roof blew off. And so all of the first responders who were supposed to stay there had to be relocated. And then because we use our Plant City Courthouse as our secondary backup, because we're like, it's inland, it's fine. In one of our last hurricanes, we actually had I don't have the actual courthouse. This is the neighborhood surrounding the courthouse. So our downtown courthouse, which is right next to the water, was not flooded. And our backup courthouse had people in canoes going past it. So even the best laid plans don't always work. And I mean, I think there's a part of this where you have to think about, hopefully you never have to face a disaster that is so catastrophic that there is nothing you can do, but it's something you have to prepare for. So I think we're normally preparing for those things that are less than the truly catastrophic and trying to do the best we can to get the courts back up and functioning. And that is how we approach it. So thank you.